Alrighty, answering the question, what is spaghetti squash? How do you cook spaghetti squash? And why do they call it spaghetti squash? That sounds like three questions to me. First, why do they call it spaghetti squash? Because after this squash is cooked, and this is how they look, they come in different sizes, half this size to almost twice this size. This is kind of like the average size here. Why do they call it spaghetti squash? Because after you cook it, we're going to clean the seeds out of here, and we're going to bake it in the oven so it's nice and tender. But then after it's all done and nice and tender, then we're going to take a fork or a spoon, but usually people use a fork to remove the squash from the shell of the squash, if you will, which is non-edible, just the inside is edible. But as it's removed, and you will see later, it looks a little bit like spaghetti. It kind of has that shape. So we'll get to that a little bit later. And what is spaghetti squash? It's just another squash, and it's like most squash, it's about 75 to 80% water. And it's particularly eaten and enjoyed during the fall season a lot, you know, and during the December holidays and so on. It's a wonderful item. It's very easy to make. It takes a little time to bake, but in terms of your hands-on preparation time, very simple, and probably 5 minutes. And I'll show you the total amount of time that it takes to do this in this video. I'll probably talk about it more than it takes the time for you to actually make it. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut the spaghetti squash in half. I'm going to bake 2 of these. And all we're basically going to do is cut it in half, take the seeds out, put it on a cookie sheet or a half sheet pan, season it with salt and pepper, put some butter on it, cover it with foil, and bake it until it's tender enough to eat. Now you can overcook this to the point where when you remove the squash from the shell, it kind of won't hold its spaghetti texture the way you want it to. It'll start getting a little mushy on you. So this you have to be a little bit careful about, okay? So we're just going to start by splitting the second one. I already have one split here. And we'll remove the seeds. A little bit like pumpkin seeds. It's a very mysterious vegetable for some people because, number one, of the way it sounds, and they don't really understand how to cook it. It has that, what I call artichoke quality to it in terms of most consumers and young learning cooks or older learning cooks for that matter. It's not one of those common American staples that everybody kind of understands. It's kind of one of the uncommon American staples that very few people understand. And that's part of the reason why it's in this video. And now I've never tried toasting these seeds like pumpkin seeds or acorn squash seeds, but they kind of look like they're toastable in that regard. All right, there we go. And we have two spaghetti squashes clean. Now we're going to ladle a little bit of melted whole unsalted butter on it. And put just enough on there so it doesn't get dry when it's cooking, because after it's cooked we can put more butter on it if we feel we need to, and I might when we're done. We'll see how they look. But the basic recipe that I'm showing you in this particular video is basically how to bake squash, how to remove the squash from the shell, and the real basic seasoning that's usually done to it, which is butter, maybe a little chopped parsley, but and some Parmesan cheese with salt and pepper. All right, so now we're going to throw a sheet of foil on this. My recipe that I have for you on this calls for you to either use a half sheet pan or a cookie sheet like this, or a semi-shallow braising pan. And you can just put it in a covered pan and do this also. I always like to fold the foil onto the pans that I'm using so that when I go in to test the squash to see if it's done or not, I can unfold the foil and then reuse the foil rather than ripping it off to find out whether or not the item is done and then having to replace the foil instead of using the same foil over and over again as I test it. All right, so we're going to put this in the oven and bake it at about 350, 375. And it might take as long as an hour and a half, but more than likely it'll be done around an hour, okay? So I'm going to pop this in the oven. And I am going to monitor very closely the doneness level of this squash throughout the time that it's cooking. And I will take it out of the oven, and obviously a time-elapsed video here. And I'll let you know exactly how long it was in. And then you'll see just how easy it is. So far I spent about 3 to 5 minutes cutting, cleaning, putting some butter, salt, and pepper on it, and putting it in the oven. And I might take about another 5 minutes to finish those 4 halves off after they come out. So you come right back in about an hour, and I'll show you how to finish it off.